He thought the abandoned hospital was his, to inherit its halls empty, its rooms long forgotten. But when massive women emerged from the shadows and said, "We'll drain you dry," it left only one question: had he claimed a ruin, or stepped into a struggle where survival meant surrendering more than he ever imagined? The wind carried a dry whistle as Silas Cade rode into the forgotten town of Brimstone Hollow. The sun hung low, casting long shadows that stretched across the cracked streets and broken windows. He had come a long way to claim what was now his by deed, a sprawling stone hospital that loomed over the town like a sentinel of another age. Folks had warned him the place was no prize, that its walls were more tomb than shelter. But Silas wasn't one to spook at ghost stories. He needed a fresh start, and land was land. The hospital stood at the far end of the main street, its windows boarded, its roof sagging under years of neglect. Faded lettering still clung to the facade. Street Harrow Infirmary. Once, it must have been a place of mercy, but now, it looked more like a mausoleum. Silas dismounted, the crunch of his boots on gravel echoing louder than seemed right in the silence. Even the crows that had shadowed his ride here gave the place a wide berth. He pushed through the front doors, the hinges groaning in protest. Inside, the air was heavy, stale with rot and dust. Rusted gurneys lay overturned in the foyer. A wheelchair sat abandoned in a corner, its wheels slowly turning as though it had just been disturbed. Silas brushed the brim of his hat back and muttered, "Well, this is home now." But the deeper he walked, the less alone he felt. His instincts, sharpened by years on the trail, whispered that eyes were on him. Hallways stretched in every direction, some blocked with rubble, others yawning into blackness. He ran his fingers along the cracked tile, noting faint scuff marks. Recent ones. Someone or something had been moving here. A sound drifted down the corridor. Not the creak of old wood, not the settling of stone. No, this was heavier, rhythmic. Footfalls, too measured to be an animal, too deliberate to be the wind. Silas froze, hand inching toward the revolver at his hip. Then, from the shadows, a figure emerged. And another, and another. They were women, if women they could rightly be called. Towering over him, shoulders brushing the broken ceiling lamps. Their frames were massive, their faces hard and sharp as carved stone. Their clothes were stitched from scraps of nurse uniforms, bandages, and strange fabrics that shimmered faintly in the dim light. Their eyes glowed with a pale hunger, fixed squarely on him. Silas's breath caught in his throat. He had expected emptiness, maybe squatters at most. Not this. The largest of them stepped forward, her voice low and resonant, echoing through the hollow halls. "You've come at last." Silas swallowed hard, steadying himself. "This here's my property. I aim to settle it." The woman's lips curled into something between a smile and a sneer. "No, Cowboy, you are ours now." Behind her, the others whispered in unison, their words chilling the marrow in his bones. "We'll drain you dry." Before we go further, drop a comment and let me know. Would you have stayed or turned and run from Brimstone Hollow? And if this story has you hooked, make sure you're subscribed, because you don't want to miss what comes next. Silas Cade's hand hovered just above the butt of his revolver. The hallway felt narrower with each breath, the towering women pressing in without taking a single step closer. Their eyes glimmered in the dim light, unblinking, fixed on him, as though they were waiting for something, waiting for him to flinch, to break. The leader's voice rolled low, measured, almost ritualistic. "You inherit bricks and mortar, but you inherit us as well." Her words hung thick in the air, heavier than the dust motes, swirling in the faint shafts of sunlight that bled through cracks in the boarded windows. Silas tried to steady his voice. "I came for land, not for company." The women chuckled in unison, a sound that rattled through the hall like a chain dragged across stone. It wasn't laughter filled with mirth, it was possession, amusement at prey who didn't yet know he was caught. One of them stepped forward, her frame blocking nearly the entire corridor. She bent low, her shadow falling over him. Her breath smelled faintly of rust and something sweet, like flowers left too long in water. She whispered, almost tenderly, "You'll see soon enough." Silas shifted back, boots scraping the tile, but he didn't draw. He knew better than to fire blind into something he didn't understand. Instead he asked, "What do you want from me?" The leader's pale eyes narrowed. "Survival. Yours is fuel for ours. This place keeps us bound, and it takes more than time to keep us standing." Her words stirred unease, as though she were speaking of something older than hunger, older than flesh. Silas's fingers itched on his revolver, but something deep inside warned him this was no fight he could win with bullets alone. A sudden metallic clang echoed behind him. Silas spun, revolver clearing leather this time. A steel gurney had rolled from the darkness of the corridor on its own, rattling until it struck the wall. When he looked back, the women had vanished. The hall stood empty, shadows spilling where their massive forms had stood moments before. His breath came hard and shallow. He pushed down the fear gnawing at his gut. He'd been in tight corners before, ambushed by rustlers and cornered by Comancheros, but this was different. He holstered the revolver slowly, forcing his pulse to steady. "If this place wants a fight," he muttered to himself, "it picked the wrong man." The silence that answered felt alive. He pressed deeper into the hospital, careful not to let the dark swallow him whole. Room after room lay in ruin-rusted cots, shattered glass, mold-stained walls. Yet here and there he found strange signs, fresh footprints, too large for any ordinary man. A half-burned candle still warm, a ragged length of cloth that looked recently torn. The hospital wasn't abandoned. It was occupied. And whoever or whatever these massive women were, they hadn't just found him. They had been waiting. Silas Cade pressed deeper into the heart of Street Harrow Infirmary, boots crunching over broken tile. The air grew colder the farther he walked, carrying a dampness that didn't belong in a desert town. His lantern beam quivered across the walls, catching faded murals of angels and saints. Their painted eyes had long since peeled away, leaving only blank patches of plaster, like faces stripped of their souls. Behind him, the doors slammed shut. Silas whirled, revolver drawn, but the hallway was empty. Only silence stretched back the way he had come. He took a steadying breath and turned forward again. That's when he saw them emerging not from the shadows this time, but stepping brazenly into the light of his lantern. The women surrounded him in a semicircle, their immense frames hemming him in. Their movements were deliberate, ceremonial. Their height made even the broad doors of the ward look small. They wore tattered remnants of nurse uniforms, sashes of blood-stained gauze trailing like banners. Their faces were striking, but not beautiful in any human sense. Sharp lines, hard jaws, eyes that glowed faintly in the gloom. The leader stepped forward, the same one who had spoken before. She carried herself like a monarch, shoulders squared, chin high. Her voice resonated through the corridor, rich and chilling. "You bear the deed, Silas Cade. That makes you ours by right." Silas leveled the revolver, though he didn't fire. "I don't recall signing myself over." The leader's lips curled into a cruel smile. "Property is not just stone and timber. This place binds flesh and spirit. You inherit its hunger. And we—" She spread her arms, the others echoing the motion in eerie synchronization, "are the hands that carry it out." The women began to chant softly, their voices rising and falling in strange cadences. The words were old, foreign, yet they wrapped around Silas's mind like chains tightening. He felt the pressure of their presence pressing down, as though the very air demanded he submit. "You'll drain me dry, is that it?" Silas asked, his voice low but steady. The leader's eyes flashed. "Yes, not of blood alone, of will, of spirit. We have endured by consuming what men bring into these walls. Strength, defiance, fire. You will give yours, piece by piece, until nothing remains. One of the women, taller than the rest, reached for him with fingers long as iron tongs. Silas stepped back, cocking the revolver. The click of the hammer echoed like thunder in the hall. "Best think twice," he warned. The leader raised her hand, halting the other woman. The air thrummed with unspoken power. Then she leaned forward, so close her breath ghosted across his face. "You can resist, cowboy, but resistance only makes the feast sweeter." The circle tightened around him, voices rising, filling the hospital with a terrible hymn. Silas realized then that this was no simple haunting. The hospital itself had claimed him, and the women were its enforcers. And if he didn't find a way to turn their own curse against them, he wouldn't be leaving Street Harrow alive. The circle of women dissolved as suddenly as it had formed. One moment their towering shadows smothered him, the next they vanished into the cracks and corridors as if the walls themselves had swallowed them whole. Only their chant lingered, echoing faintly before fading into silence. Silas Cade stood alone in the corridor, revolver trembling slightly in his hand. He exhaled slowly, holstering the weapon. They hadn't struck him down outright, which meant they wanted something more than his body. They wanted him broken first. He pushed deeper into the infirmary, determined to learn just what devilry bound those women to the place. His lantern light danced across patient rooms, most gutted, their beds overturned and rusted to skeletons of iron. Charts lay scattered across the floor, brittle as dead leaves. Names and dates, each scrawled with the same final word, in the margins: expired. The deeper he went, the more deliberate the ruin seemed. One ward's doors were chained from the outside, the metal rusted but still solid. He leaned closer, brushing off dust, and froze. Fresh scratches gouged the frame. Something had clawed from within not long ago. Silas's gut tightened. He turned a corner and found himself before a heavy wooden door with a brass plaque. Though tarnished, the engraving was legible: Administrator's Office. If there were answers anywhere, they'd be here. The door groaned as he pushed it open. Inside, shelves sagged with rotted ledgers, their pages crawling with mildew. But on the desk, preserved beneath a cracked sheet of glass, lay a single journal. He brushed the dust away and pried it open. The handwriting was jagged, urgent. "The women grow stronger with each harvest. I thought it was a cure, a way to stave off their wasting sickness. But the hunger only deepens. They are no longer patients. They are something else entirely." Silas flipped through, eyes narrowing. Page after page spoke of experiments carried out in secret, nurses and patients, subjected to treatments meant to grant vitality by draining the strength of others. The doctor had failed, but his work had twisted the women into something beyond human, bound to the hospital itself. The last entry chilled him most. "The curse cannot leave these walls. The women are its guardians and its prisoners. Whoever inherits the property inherits the covenant. May God have mercy on the next soul foolish enough to claim it." Silas slammed the journal shut, his jaw tight. So that was it. His inheritance wasn't land at all. It was a sentence. A whisper coiled around his ear. "Reading won't save you." He spun, revolver snapping up. The leader stood framed in the doorway, her massive silhouette blotting out the lantern light. Behind her, the others gathered, their eyes gleaming with predatory hunger. "You know now," she said, her voice almost tender. "This place breathes through us. And you, Silas Cade, are its newest breath." The floorboards groaned under their approach, every step shaking the room. Silas braced himself. The only way out of this curse was through it. The women herded Silas down the corridor like cattle, their towering forms casting shifting shadows against the mold-stained walls. He kept his revolver holstered. Bullets against flesh twisted by curses seemed a poor wager. His mind worked instead, cataloging every door, every turn, every exit. If they wanted to break him, he'd make sure it was a fight they wouldn't forget. They led him into what had once been the hospital chapel. The pews were rotted to splinters, stained glass windows fractured into jagged shards that bled pale light across the floor. At the altar, a crude circle of ash and bone had been drawn, symbols etched into the stone. The air smelled of iron, sweet and foul, all at once. The leader motioned to the circle. "Step inside." Silas's jaw tightened. "And if I don't?" A ripple of laughter rolled through the women, low and terrible. One reached out, her hand large enough to crush his skull. Silas raised his palms, feigning surrender, then stepped into the circle. Better to play along for now. The chanting began at once. Their voices rose and fell, a rhythm that seemed to gnaw at his bones. Heat surged through the cymbals, crawling up his boots like fire ants. His knees wobbled, but he locked them firm. "You will yield," the leader said, her eyes boring into his. "Give yourself, and the struggle ends." Silas straightened his back, forcing his voice to cut through the chant. "I've been shot at, starved out, and run near to death by men twice as mean as you. If you think a little fire under my boots is going to make me bow, you'll be waiting a long while." For the first time, silence rippled through their ritual. The chanting faltered. The leader's lips thinned. Another woman leaned closer, her tone almost coaxing. "Why resist? It is easier to be emptied. You will feel no pain. Only release." Silas snorted. "Lady, I've never been fond of easy roads. They usually lead off a cliff." A flicker of something passed between the women, annoyance, maybe even doubt. He had struck a nerve. Their strength thrived on fear, on submission. His defiance wasn't just resistance, it was poison to their ritual. The leader stepped into the circle, towering above him. "Every man breaks. It is only a matter of when." Silas met her gaze squarely. "Maybe, but today isn't your day." She raised a hand, and the ash circle blazed with sudden light. Pain lanced through Silas's legs, his body trembling under the pressure. He ground his teeth, refusing to cry out. The women leaned forward, hungry for the sound of his surrender. But when the light died, Silas remained standing, sweating, shaking, but unbroken. The leader's eyes narrowed, and her voice dropped to a hiss. "Very well. If defiance is your game, then we shall play it. But understand this, every man who stood where you stand is nothing now but dust beneath our feet." Silas lifted his chin. "Then I aim to be the first who walks out." For the first time, one of the women off to the side looked at him not with hunger, but with something sharper, respect. The leader dismissed the circle with a sweep of her hand, the ash scattering as if blown by an unseen wind. The women pulled back, their gazes still fixed on Silas, but the hunger in their eyes had sharpened into something else, curiosity. He hadn't broken. Not yet. And that made him dangerous. They herded him into a ward, stripped bare of beds, its windows boarded, its doors bolted from the outside. The leader stepped inside with him, towering close enough that he could see the scars running across her throat, puckered and pale. She leaned down until her breath pressed warm against his cheek. "You defied the circle," she said. "No one has done that in a generation." Silas met her gaze steadily. "Maybe your last guest didn't have the same spine." Her hand shot out, faster than her size should have allowed. Fingers clamped around his throat, lifting him until his boots scraped the floorboards. He clawed at her grip, but it was like iron. "You mistake defiance for strength," she hissed. "Strength is power over others, power to command, power to bend." She tightened her hold, and black spots swam in his vision. "That power is mine." With a growl, she dropped him. Silas hit the floor hard, coughing, gasping for air. He wiped blood from his lip and forced a grin. "If choking folks is your idea of leadership, then I'd say you're running short on ideas." Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't strike again. Instead, she crouched, her massive frame looming like a storm cloud. The others follow me because I keep them alive. Without me, they would tear each other apart. You think you see cracks in us? You are the crack, Silas Cade. And if I let it spread, this place will fall to ruin. Silas studied her as she spoke, noting the subtle flick of her eyes toward the door, where two of the other women stood waiting. They didn't meet her gaze. They were loyal, but fear anchored that loyalty more than devotion. The leader rose, her voice booming so that even those outside the ward could hear. Remember this. I am the breath of Street Harrow. Through me it endures. Through me you endure. Without me, you are nothing. The others echoed her words like a litany, but the sound was uneven, fractured. Some voices carried conviction, others wavered. Silas tucked that detail away. The leader was powerful, yes, but not unchallenged. She leaned close once more, her lips curling into a predator's smile. Tomorrow we will test you again and again, until you kneel, until every ounce of fire in you is gone. Your will is meat, and I will carve it piece by piece. Silas forced himself to meet her gaze, even as his bruised throat ached. If you're so sure I'll kneel, you wouldn't be working so hard to prove it. For a heartbeat, her eyes flickered anger, or perhaps doubt. Then she stormed out, the others trailing after her, like shadows. Left alone, Silas leaned back against the wall, wincing as he touched the bruises on his neck. She held the women together, no doubt, but cracks existed in every fortress. All he had to do was widen them. Silas Cade waited until the footsteps faded down the hall before moving. The ward was bare, but he had survived worse with less. He tested the door first, solid iron bolts locked from the outside. Then the window boarded tight, nails driven deep, but wood rots faster than metal. He pressed his shoulder against one board, testing. It groaned, but held. He drew his knife, the same blade he had carried through border skirmishes and cattle drives, and worked it between the planks. Sweat beaded at his temple as he pried, careful to muffle the sound. After several tense minutes, a nail gave with a faint squeal. Moonlight spilled through the crack. Silas pushed harder, widening the gap. Beyond lay the back lot of the hospital, a courtyard overrun with weeds, the old fence collapsing into shadow. His pulse quickened. Freedom was a dozen steps away. He squeezed through, the rough wood biting into his shoulders. His boots hit the courtyard dirt with a muted thud. For the first time since entering Street Harrow, he felt clean air against his face. But silence in a place like this was never safe. He crept across the yard, crouching low behind toppled stonework. His eyes darted to the fence line, half rotted. A good kick might splinter it enough to pass through. He drew closer. A whisper stopped him. Not the wind. Voices, low, hushed, but too near. He turned and froze. Two of the women stood in the shadows by the courtyard wall. They weren't looking his way. They spoke to each other in tones sharp and hurried. He caught only fragments, weakened. Too long. Leader grows. Restless. Cracks. Just as he had suspected. They were not united. He backed away, silent as a ghost, until his boot caught a shard of glass. The crunch echoed like thunder. The women's heads snapped up. Their eyes glowed, catching the moonlight. One hissed, pointing, "There!" Silas bolted for the fence, slamming his shoulder into the wood. It cracked, splinters flying, but not enough. Behind him came the pounding of colossal footsteps. He rammed the fence again, muscles screaming. This time the boards gave, snapping outward. He forced himself through, scraping his arms raw on jagged wood. He hit the ground on the other side and rolled to his feet. For one fleeting moment, he thought he was free. A massive hand shot through the gap, seizing his coat. Silas twisted, shucking free of the garment as the wood splintered wider. He sprinted into the dark, heart hammering. Then the world lurched. Something heavy slammed into him from the side, sending him sprawling into the weeds. The leader's shadow fell over him as she stepped through the fence as if it were paper. "You thought to flee?" Her voice rumbled like distant thunder. She hauled him up by the collar with terrifying ease. "This place does not release its chosen. You belong to us." Her grip tightened, cutting off his breath. Around her, the other women closed in, their faces masks of fury. Silas clawed for air, even as his mind worked furiously. He hadn't escaped, but he had seen enough. Cracks in their unity, proof of divisions. That was something worth bleeding for. They dragged Silas Cade back through the hospital corridors, his boots scraping the tile, his shirt torn where the leader's grip had caught him. The women moved in silence, but their fury pulsed in every heavy step. When they shoved him into the chapel once more, the leader stood before him, her eyes burning like cold fire. "You think yourself clever," she said. "You run, we catch. You fight, we break. There is no end but surrender." Silas spat blood to the side and gave her a crooked grin. "Funny thing, if you really believe that, you wouldn't be working this hard to convince me." A murmur rippled through the ranks. The leader's jaw tightened. She motioned, and the woman shoved him against a cracked pillar, binding his wrists with strips of linen that bit like iron. As they worked, Silas studied them. Not all faces bore the same hunger. Some looked uncertain, their eyes flicking toward him, then quickly away when the leader's gaze swept over them. He remembered the courtyard whispers in the dark, words about weakness, about restlessness. He had seen cracks in their fortress. Now was the time to widen them. "You follow her," he said, nodding toward the leader. "But I heard you out there. Not all of you agree. Some of you wonder how long this can last." The leader snarled. Silence. Silas pressed on, his voice steady. "She calls it strength, but it's fear that keeps you chained. You're bound to this place the same as me. The only difference is, you don't fight it anymore." One of the women, a tall figure with a long scar down her cheek, hesitated in tying the knot at his wrist. Her eyes lingered on him, flickering with something other than hunger. The leader noticed. "Bind him tighter," she barked. The scarred woman flinched, tightening the knot roughly. But the hesitation had been real. Silas winced against the bonds, but his grin never faded. "See? Even your own hand shakes at her word. That's not loyalty, that's fear." The leader struck him across the face with the back of her hand, the blow rattling his teeth. "Enough!" Silas spat again, blood streaking his chin. "You can hit me all night. Won't change the truth. She needs me more than she lets on. If I break, so does she hold on to you." The chapel fell into uneasy silence. The leader loomed above him, chest rising and falling, fury radiating from her like heat. Yet behind her, Silas saw it, the flicker of doubt in more than one pair of eyes. She raised her hand to command the chant again, but the voices that answered were not as strong as before. The rhythm faltered, broken by hesitation. Silas leaned against the pillar, his face bruised, his wrists raw, but his eyes alive with defiance. He had planted the seed. The women might have thought of themselves as his jailers, but one by one, they were starting to look like prisoners too. The leader wasted no more time with half measures. She summoned all the women to the grand hall, a cavernous chamber at the heart of street. Harrow Infirmary, where crumbling balconies loomed over a tiled floor, stained dark by decades of use. Once, it might have been a ward or gathering place. Now, it was a ritual ground. Silas Cade was dragged to the center, his wrists bound, his body bruised but his spirit still unbroken. Lanterns were lit in every corner, their glow shuddering against the cracked walls. The leader stood above him on the dais, her voice rising, commanding the women into a thunderous chant. "This man will break," she declared, her words carrying like a hammer. "And when he does, we will drink his fire until none remains." The chant swelled, shaking the rafters. The women circled him, their shadows stretching long and monstrous. The air grew heavy, thick with the heat of their voices. Silas felt it pressing against his chest, trying to squeeze the breath from him. But he also saw it, the hesitation. A few women faltered, their lips moving without sound, their eyes flicking between him and the leader. The seeds of doubt he had sown were sprouting. The leader raised her arms. A jagged symbol carved into the floor blazed to life beneath Silas, searing through the soles of his boots. Pain lanced through him, white-hot, his muscles convulsing. The women leaned forward, hungering for his collapse. Silas gritted his teeth. Through the haze of agony he shouted, "Look at her! Look what she does to you! You're chained to her, same as me!" A murmur rippled through the circle. The leader's eyes snapped toward the wavering voices. "Ignore him," she roared. "He is bait, nothing more." But her fury betrayed her. The more she tried to smother dissent, the more it grew. One of the women, the scarred one, who had faltered before, stepped back from the circle. Her voice trembled, but it was loud enough to cut through the chant. "He's right. We are bound, but bound to her more than the curse." The chant cracked, broken by whispers of agreement. The leader snarled, leaping from the dais with inhuman speed. She struck the scarred woman across the chest, sending her sprawling. "Traitor!" Chaos erupted. Some women surged to the leader's side, loyal and furious. Others hesitated, caught between fear and defiance. The circle shattered. Silas seized his chance. He braced his feet against the burning symbol and heaved, toppling the pillar he'd been tied to. It crashed against the floor, snapping the bindings on his wrists. He staggered to his feet, raw but free. The leader turned on him, her massive frame towering, her eyes ablaze with wrath. "You will kneel, Cade." Silas raised his fists, every muscle screaming but his voice steady. "Not today." The grand hall became a battlefield, loyalists clashing with defectors, shadows twisting under lantern light. And at its heart, Silas faced the leader, the hospital itself seeming to hold its breath for the outcome. The grand hall shook with chaos. Women clashed with each other, their voices rising in a chorus of rage and betrayal. Some fought to defend the leader. Others struck against her with years of pent-up resentment. Shadows reeled across the cracked walls, and the lanterns guttered as if the very building trembled. At the center of it all stood Silas Cade and the leader. She advanced with predatory grace, her colossal frame blotting out the light. Her fists curled, veins blackened by whatever power the hospital had poured into her veins. "You cannot win," she thundered. "This place made me. It feeds me. Every scream, every drop of fear, you think your spark can smother a fire that has burned for generations." Silas wiped blood from his chin, standing firm. "You're not fire, you're rot, and rot falls if you starve it." She lunged, her hand swiping with enough force to crack stone. Silas dove aside, rolling across the tile. He came up near the toppled pillar, his revolver lying beside it. He snatched the weapon, but he didn't fire. He knew bullets wouldn't end this, not against a creature built from curses and ritual. Instead, he aimed for the lanterns. One shot, then another. The flames burst, scattering fire across the carved sigils on the floor. The symbols blazed, not with controlled ritual light, but wild, consuming fire. The chant faltered. The power binding the women fractured, some collapsing as though their strings had been cut. The leader roared, staggering under the sudden break in her dominion. She rounded on him, eyes blazing. "You dare!" Silas leveled the revolver at her chest, hammer cocked. "You wanted my will? Here it is." He fired not at her heart, but at the chains of ash and bone still glowing at her feet. The blast shattered the circle. A scream tore from her throat, not of pain but of fury, as the tether snapped. The other women fell back, clutching their heads, as the leader's power bled out of her like smoke. She staggered, still immense, still deadly, but diminished. Silas charged, swinging the broken pillar like a club. It struck her square in the chest, sending her sprawling against the dais. The floor cracked beneath her weight. For a heartbeat, the hall went still. Then the leader dragged herself upright, her voice a guttural rasp. If I fall, this place falls with me. Then let it fall, Silas growled. He shoved the blazing pillar into the daisy's cracked foundation. Fire roared upward, devouring the old wood and stone. The hospital groaned as if alive, the walls splitting, the ceiling raining plaster. The leader shrieked, her massive form collapsing into the inferno. The other women scattered, some vanishing into shadow, others falling lifeless where they stood. The curse was breaking or consuming itself. Silas stumbled through the collapsing hall, lungs burning with smoke. He burst through the ruined doors into the cold night air just as the roof caved in behind him. Dawn bled over Brimstone Hollow, painting the sky in streaks of fire. Silas leaned on the fence, coughing, his face streaked with ash. Behind him, street. Harrow Infirmary smoldered, its windows glowing like dying eyes. He was alive, changed, scarred, but alive. The town lay silent, but no longer watched. Whatever curse had ruled its heart had burned with the leader's fall. Silas pulled his hat low over his brow, his voice hoarse but steady. Guess this inheritance wasn't worth keeping. And with the rising sun at his back, he walked away, leaving the ashes of the hospital to whisper their own warnings to whatever fool might come after. If you thought these were crazy, you won't want to miss what happens in this next video.